Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer with me, Steve Bland. Now this podcast is a bit of a how-to guide for you to help you overcome common myths, fears and barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. Whether you're affected by cancer yourself, whether you're a healthcare professional, maybe a loved one is affected by cancer, we hope there's something in there for you because we know that not all cancers are preventable, but there are things that we can all do to make a real positive difference to the health and well-being of our family, our friends, our colleagues and ourselves. This episode is all about spotting symptoms of womb, cervical, ovarian, vulva and vaginal cancers. And while that might seem like a really serious topic, and it is, we're going to tackle it with a large dose of humour because my guest is the amazing stand-up comic Karen Hobbs. Now Karen, as well as being an amazing comedian, also does a lot of work for the Eve Appeal and has been running womb cancer focus groups for the You Need to Know campaign, which is run in conjunction with the Eve Appeal and the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm also joined in this one by Femi Odewale, who's the Managing Director of the Alliance. So without further ado, let's get cracking. So welcome, Karen, and welcome back, Femi. Let's start off with you, Karen. Do you want to just explain your cancer story?
Thank you for having me. And Steve, I'm glad you said cancer story, not cancer journey.
I wouldn't say
because we
journey.
hate the horrible. Anyone that's had cancer or knows someone's had cancer will hear people say, can you just speak a bit about your journey?
Yeah.
We don't like it. It's not a journey. We didn't decide to embark on it. So no, it's a story. Thank you. So I was 24, which was obviously like last year. Thanks, Femi. You should have laughed at that
I'm just
point.
about to say,
Yeah, sure, babe.
Sure.
And I hadn't had a cervical screening test at this point because I was a little bit too young, and I hadn't had the HPV vaccine because I was a few months too old by the time it was brought out in schools. So that is obviously going to be a hint at what type of cancer I had.
Yeah.
It was cervical. And a lot of people will question when they hear this, do you think the screening age should be lowered? Because if I had had a screening test at a younger age than it starts at 25, this could have been prevented. Or
What's the reason for it being 25? Is it just an arbitrary number or is there some thought behind it?
No, the problem is it's very, because if I had had a screening test earlier, this would have been a bit of an easier story. But there is a reason, and it's because under 25, first of all, let's not ignore it's also cost effective because it means that everybody with a cervix can be screened. And it's looking for a virus. It's not looking for cervical cancer. It's looking for the HPV virus that, if found, can be either monitored or checked for abnormal cells. And if abnormal cells are found, depending on how serious they are, they can either be removed or monitored, and they would hopefully revert to normal if mild changes. And if just HPV is found and not abnormal cells, then you're tested again in a year for HPV. And it clears most of the time. So it's a screening test to check if this virus and cells are present. So under 25, it wasn't found to be beneficial in terms of saving lives from cervical cancer. And also there was a higher rate of false positive results. So people were getting these abnormal results, going for a colposcopy, which is what you have at the hospital. It's a closer examination of the cervix, and being treated potentially for these abnormal cells when in fact they were cells that would have reverted back to normal anyway. So we don't want to over-treat the cervix because every time you remove cells from the cervix, it's taking a bit of the cervix away, it's weakening the cervix, and gradually the more of a cervix that's taken away, there is a correlation, a link to things like increased miscarriages because it's weakening the cervix. And there are risks as well as benefits, like with everything. Sure. So the age of 25 is a safe and cost-effective way of screening everybody with a cervix. But I'll say this a million times throughout this episode, screening and symptoms are different things. So if anybody is under 25 and has any of the symptoms of cervical cancer, which I'll talk about in a second when I tell my story, not my journey, we would say, please go and speak to your doctor, and you wouldn't need a cervical screening test, you would need investigation and referral for a colposcopy and to look at things more closely. You wouldn't need a screening test. So if you have symptoms, it doesn't matter what age you are, you wouldn't wait till you're 25 for your first screening appointment anyway. So it's a big topic. Try and condense that. But essentially, there is a reason. I was unlucky, and it's really rare to get cervical cancer under 25. It's just lucky that it happened to me and I like talking about it, but it also therefore looks like it happens to everybody because I'm so public with it. But it's really rare. It's most common in people under 45, but between 30 and 45, not under 25. So I was 24, long story short. My journey. Back on the journey. I was 24, hadn't had a test or the HPV vaccine, and I don't know about you guys, but I didn't get much decent sex ed information at school at all. You know, I knew that, use condoms with a partner. I knew that sort of basic information, but I didn't know anything about this very common virus that most people will get it. It's passed on through sexual contact, and it's very common, and it's nothing to worry or be ashamed about, and it normally clears, etc. Didn't know anything about that. So I had a bit of bleeding between periods, which didn't initially worry me because I was taking the combined contraceptive pill, aka the pill, and any people listening, don't worry, you're allowed to back the pill packets. It's safe to do so. I was back-to-backing the pill packets because I was on holiday and didn't want to get my period in a bikini. And so I had a bit of brown discharge whilst back-to-backing the pill packets. And I just thought, oh, it's just my withdrawal bleed, my what I call period, but it is a withdrawal bleed if you're on the pill, trying to get through because I've taken too many pill packets. Didn't think anything of it, came back off holiday and had sex, good for me, with my then boyfriend, and there was a lot of bright red blood afterwards. And he immediately thought, oh, it's because he was too big for me, which was very sweet. And I just thought, oh, maybe, but I wasn't in any pain or anything. It wasn't as though it was a sort of sex accident. It just was just blood everywhere. Went to the toilet, there was more blood. And I thought, have either of us cut ourselves? No. So sort of thought, okay, let's just leave it. Maybe he's right. And then I went on to Google when I got home. And I think a lot of people bash going on Dr. Google because the horror stories are on the internet, right? You don't, have a great experience of something medical and then go and review the doctor or write about it or go into forums and explain that you were fine, you get on with your life. So there's a kind of unnatural bias, the negative way. But for me, it saved my life because the top results were things like an untreated STI, like pelvic inflammatory disease, because something like chlamydia hadn't been treated, an ectopic pregnancy, and cervical cancer was on there. And I didn't feel ill at all. And I thought, hopefully I've just got chlamydia. Woo, you really find yourself hoping for weird things on this journey. But it prompted me to go to the doctor because I knew something was wrong. Could have been nothing at all. And to sort of skip through a few different medical appointments, I went to the GP. They examined me with a speculum, which is the instrument inserted into the vagina to hold the vagina open so you can see the cervix more clearly. And immediately she said, okay, we're going to send you for a colposcopy, which we've explained about, because your cervix looks angry. I didn't really know, cervixes had emotions, but there we are. And obviously at this point you think, okay, now I'm going to hospital. So I felt a little bit more worried. It wasn't something they could just treat there and then at the doctor's. Went for a colposcopy appointment. And I don't want to frighten anybody listening to this because anybody with an abnormal screening result will go for a colposcopy appointment. There's a whole colposcopy clinic within each hospital. It's not a unusual or a procedure that means you have cancer. It's just the next step in the process to rule it out. Let's think of it like that. So had a colposcopy, which is where they just look at the cervix more closely on a big screen with an instrument called a colposcope. And after a few minutes, the doctor looking after me said, I'm just going to get someone a bit more senior. And then you just think, okay, it's probably not one of the lesser serious things on the list from Google. And then a Mr. came in, and you'll know in healthcare it goes a doctor and then a Mr. is top dog. And he came in his waistcoat and pocket watch, and I thought, oh God, I think I've got cancer, because why else would he be here? And he took a biopsy of the cervix, so a little sample, and I was obviously panicking at this point because it felt like it had been escalated. And I sat down and said, is it cancer? Can you please just tell me? Because I'm really panicking at this point. And he says, we obviously need to wait for the results of the biopsy, take a couple of weeks. And I said, I was kind of pushing. I basically slipped in £10. I didn't, if anybody's listening. St George's, don't go bust. And I said, but please just tell me, give me some idea. And he said, okay, put it this way. We have to wait for the results, but I've been doing this for 30 years and I'd be surprised if this wasn't cancer.
Right.
And at that point for me, since then, and speaking to people, because you guys will know, once you have cancer or know somebody with cancer, everybody in your life suddenly has cancer because of the things you end up doing and surrounding yourself. And, you know, it's not contagious. It's just that you end up meeting people in similar situations. Lots of people, when they have that sort of initial appointment where they have to then wait for the results, try and convince themselves, or at least hope that it's not, and I'll wait for the results, it'll be fine. And then when it's confirmed to be cancer, that's when somebody's air quote journey starts. But for me, when he said it's unlikely not to be, that for me was a confirmation then, because he wouldn't have said that.
Yeah, I mean that's about as committal as they get in that early stage.
He's not going to promise me, but you know what I mean? If someone of that position says I'd be surprised if it wasn't or was something, you're kind of going to go with what they're hinting at.
Did 24-year-old Karen have any knowledge of what this cancer diagnosis might mean, what the treatment might involve, of just cancer in general?
Absolutely F all in terms of gynae cervical stuff. Absolutely nothing. I knew what the menopause was, i.e. my mum's period stopped when she was in her 50s at some point. Didn't know anything else. Knew that if you had sex with somebody without protection, it's a good idea to get an STI check. I knew that the pill stopped your periods. That was it. I didn't know anything else. Cancer-wise, I think I knew, you know, a grandparent when I was 3 had passed away from what I now know as prostate cancer, but I didn't know much at all other than what I think the general population and the sort of typical view of cancer is within society, in that it's something old people get and it makes you very ill. You see it in films where people, you know, are having chemo, lose their hair, and people die. That's what I knew of cancer. Very
stereotypical.
Very 2D image of it. And obviously that does happen to people, but there's so much more to it. I think it's an umbrella. It's not one thing. It's a word that can have many different meanings and many different outcomes. So I knew it was a scary, sad, poorly thing, and I knew nothing about the type of cancer I had. Nothing at all. I didn't know anything about HPV. All I knew about cervical cancer really was that Jade Goody had died from it a few years before that. But that didn't mean anything to me because I was a teenager. It was sad to see somebody I'd seen on Big Brother pass away, of course, but the type of cancer didn't mean anything to me.
Did you even think about the Jade Goody story at that point in time, or it just didn't even cross your mind until after?
Maybe afterwards, when people, oh my God, I don't know if we've got time to do, you know, an unedited version of the things people say when you have cancer, but so many people said, oh, my aunt had that, or I knew someone that had that, or oh, Jade Goody died.
It's incredible the things that people think are actually helpful, which inevitably aren't actually helpful in any way at all.
We really want, I think, as humans, to connect with people. And I think people sometimes in the moments where you're telling them something awkward or uncomfortable just want to say anything they know.
That's 100% it. They want to say something and they know they should say something and they know there's something they could say that might help, but they don't know what to say. And that kind of brings me on to exploring what you do now. If you haven't gathered by now, Karen is absolutely hilarious. And this is what you do, Karen, isn't it? You're a comedian. And as your Twitter bio or X bio does say, your comedy revolves around vaginas and periods.
Because that's all female comedians talk about. So I thought, you know what, I've got a reason to double down on this. So to go back to the biopsy results, I then thought, okay, I've got cancer. And 2 weeks later, it was confirmed that was that. I knew at that point, but then telling friends and family after the confirmation appointment was, you know, obviously we haven't got time to go into every detailed bit of the story, but was, as you can imagine or know already, the worst thing ever. It was horrific. But I was very lucky, and it's always weird. I always say I'm lucky, even though I'm talking about having cancer at 24, but I was lucky in that it was a late stage 1. So it was small. It was grade 3, so it was small but nasty, but it was contained. So it was just in my cervix. So I had again, keep saying just, oh, it was just this, it was just that. So I had a radical trachelectomy, which is an operation to remove the entirety of the cervix, the top section of the vagina and the surrounding lymph nodes to check it hadn't spread, so I didn't have to have chemo or internal brachytherapy, which is internal radiotherapy. And it hadn't spread, and touch wood, even though this is not a wooden table, so you guys have really let me down here, that was it. So from knowing that it hadn't spread and I didn't need further treatment, obviously it took a while to physically recover. I don't think certainly not myself, ever recovers mentally. I think you just change mentally. But getting back to the comedy question, I will answer questions as well. I know every time you ask a question, I'm like, I'll just do a 5-minute segue, thank you. So I had always found that I enjoyed comedy, but I didn't think I had anything, not that, if everybody is interesting in their own way, but I didn't find I had anything particularly unique to talk about on stage, or something to give me a sense of urgency to say, oh my God, I suddenly have to create comedy. I didn't have a thing that was happening. Not that you have to. Some people are just funny without getting cancer at 24. But when I was diagnosed, I thought, okay, if I don't die in hospital, I don't care if I die on stage. And I just thought, screw it. So a year after my operation, I started doing stand-up. And I thought, if I've got 5 minutes at least out of this, and it's not a funny subject because it's cancer, but there's so much funny stuff that can happen.
Femi, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because one of the kind of barriers in terms of getting people to their screening appointments, getting people to sort of be more aware of their symptoms in terms of early diagnosis. One of the big barriers is that we don't like talking about these things. These are difficult topics to talk about, and when we introduce them into comedy in the way that Karen is doing, all of a sudden it opens up the conversations. It makes it okay to talk about these difficult topics, okay to laugh at them even. And like I say, that must have an impact on the number of people that are checking themselves or going to their appointments or doing their screenings.
Absolutely. And I think it's a far better way to engage with people, to be honest with you. How else people are going to be more attentive to the story than they would do sitting in a room, a white room like this. I think it's powerful to share stories through comedy, but also actually you don't really want to have sad conversations about cancer. It starts to scare people.
I think a dark sense of humour is actually part of the armoury, that every person going through cancer probably needs.
It is a sack of, I won't swear, a sack of crap, right? So whatever you need to do, if you're going through it yourself to get through it, do what you need to do. If that's making jokes, if you have the disease yourself, you can also do. That's why I never apologise for it. I've had it, so I can talk about my experience in whatever way I want to. But I do understand when sharing information in more general public stuff rather than a personal kind of cathartic comedy approach to it, that obviously more sensitivity is required. But like you said, Femi, I think people, I'm not saying everybody listens and hangs on to every word I say, but I think it's, like we said at the beginning, it's really scary. It's a heavy, scary subject that, it'll never happen to me, or if it does happen to you, you think the worst. So I think people relax a bit when they laugh. And I think if you relax, you're more likely to absorb information and remember that you had a good time at that gig and learned something, or in the sessions that we'll talk about in a minute, that was fun, and you remember it for good reasons rather than scary reasons.
I think for some that are actually going through it, and it does look quite, it is quite an extreme, it could be quite extreme. To laugh your way through the process is, I think it's phenomenal. I think I want to say laugh your way through I shouldn't do that, but laughing your way through as in, knowing that you're not alone, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, knowing that actually there are some good things that we can share. There are some, you're not alone really, and there's some great things that we can share is possible. I think it changes so much in terms of how people view their process through cancer, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. I think.
And I think especially when it comes to gynae cancers, and I know the only one of the 5 gynae cancers that has a screening program is cervical, but talking about gynae healthcare, cervical screening and gynae cancers in general, I find that not any cancer at all that is easy to talk about. It's not that case, but I think it probably was a bit easier for Rachel maybe to talk about breast cancer than it is for somebody next door to get a vulval cancer. You know, it's
interesting that you say that and you bring up breast cancer. I saw some really concerning stats just announced recently by the NHS England, end of January this was. A third of women weren't going to their breast screening appointments.
Really?
And actually for first-time attendees, so the first time that a woman was invited for their screening, 46.3% didn't attend. Now, it's just extraordinary because we kind of have a perception, or I think I had a perception, maybe the perception's out there, that we've kind of got a handle on breast cancer, that, you know, people understand the symptoms. And maybe that's bringing in a bit of complacency, that people think it's easily curable, so I don't need to, you know, catch it as early. But it must be frustrating, you know, to hear that and to kind of, you know, think about the comparisons with a smear test, where, you know, again, we see large numbers of people don't go to the appointments that they are entitled to go to.
So as we said, cervical screening starts at 25 and it's every 3 to 5 years up to 49, depending on what part of the UK you're in, and then 49 to 64, 65 every 5 years. But of course, if you have any abnormal results or HPV, it's more regular. That's just presuming everybody has a clear run of it. And I think for the first age group, I think the attendance is about 66 odd %, which is higher than breast. It's definitely higher than the first breast screening. So that's really surprising. I had just thought boobs were easier to talk about, but clearly there's still something missing, isn't there?
So what is missing then? And I know in a moment we're going to talk about the You Need to Know campaign that you've been involved with. You need to know, you know, we could broaden it out to the things you need to know about any kind of cancers, but looking at gynae cancers, your sort of chosen specialist subject. Why are we so bad at talking about these things, do you think?
Because it's called cancer screening, it's got the word cancer in, that's half of the title, and I think it scares people. I think unless you know you already have cancer, you're scared of getting cancer, or equally, or on the other hand, think, oh, it won't apply to me, or oh, I'm not going to get that, or oh, it doesn't matter, I feel fine. I think the phrase cancer screening almost, it maybe suggests an illness rather than a prevention. Even though the word screening is there, it's kind of cancer's the thing you die of and old people get, and screening is, oh, just, you know, the thing you get at the airport to check you've not, you know, got anything naughty on you. I think the words kind of almost don't mesh together very well, which rebrand the whole thing. But it is what it is, right? It's screening for cancer, but it's not almost testing for cancer when it comes to cervical. It's testing for a virus to see if that's going to turn any cells into abnormal cells, to see if that HPV, from the point of, you know, sexual contact and passing on HPV to getting, if ever, which is rare, a cervical cancer, is at least 10 years typically. Of course, things can happen sooner, but it's a long process, and I think maybe there's not much sense of urgency to it. And I also think that not everybody necessarily understands what is happening at the test. You get an information booklet, but, you know, what if you aren't familiar with some of the phrases, or English isn't your first language, or you need an easy read version because you have a learning disability and that's not available. You get things in the post. You know, I don't look at all the mail I get, and I think sometimes it maybe doesn't either feel relevant to you or is too much to try and understand. But also, there are so many reasons why somebody, not just a cervical screening appointment, but any type of gynae health appointment, I hate the word intimate, but intimate examination, vaginal examination, they can't attend. And there's all these campaigns and talks of, come on girls, don't fear the smear, come on ladies, 2 minutes to save your life, let's go. That might help a certain percentage of people that aren't attending to make them think, oh yeah, do you know what, I've been reminded, I'll dig out that letter, I'll book it. I would put 10 whole pounds on the fact that people that are not attending their cervical screening appointments, because that's what I can talk about more than obviously the breast side of things. I would put money on people not attending their cervical screening appointments. Very few of them are not attending just because they can't be bothered. It will be because, I don't know if you need to put a trigger warning for the type of language, but it will be because they've been raped. So many women have been sexually assaulted or are survivors of trauma and abuse and cannot go through with that type of appointment. Somebody will be in a wheelchair and the GP surgery isn't equipped to accommodate that. Someone will have a learning disability and have not quite understood what's happened in the letter and not had an easy read version. Somebody will be from a background, family, community, culture that means that this type of examination has got a real sort of taboo and stigma because it's associated with sex and HPV is passed on through sexual contact. There are so many reasons why somebody doesn't attend, and the very light-hearted, come on, take your knickers off, and nurses and doctors, they don't care. They see loads of them. They see vulvas and vaginas all day, every day. That humorous approach, going back to humour, almost is my favourite approach. I'd love to make a joke of it all the time, but I really don't think, I've not known people through working at the Eve Appeal that have not attended their appointment because they are silly billies.
Femi, that takes me back a little bit to what we discussed in episode 1, where we talked about the work that is going on to, really address some of the niche, but also, quite widespread reasons why someone won't attend an appointment or won't, return their screen or whatever it might be. And yeah, like I said, the work that's going on, because there is loads of work going on in this part of London to address some of these challenges.
One of the key things that we do find in this, especially for North East London, which is, I think I mentioned, give you the numbers before, the minorities here is 53%. So you do have the cultural elements that you spoke about. You do have all of the socio-economic factors in at play here as well. So it is about how best do we communicate with the very diverse community that we are serving. And I think, some of the things I've been quiet because some of the things that you've been, in fact, just
I'm not letting you speak, really.
No, not really. It's like, I've just been like, whoa, then you're just giving me ideas. The key thing about laughter is that it does reduce stress.
Yeah.
Whilst you were talking, I was like, Googling actually benefits of laughter. We all know them, but I was trying to see if there's any direct link to cancer. But I think the key thing here, put in different programs to try and support people mentally when they're going through cancer before and after is absolutely crucial, or during and after is absolutely crucial. And actually, the stress that people go through is massive. So when you start to talk about actually comedy, it starts to give me ideas as to what else could we do around engaging with various different communities through. I mean, for me, it's about every aspect of reaching the community that we serve. So comedy is one, and I was just like looking into that. But yes, we've got various different campaigns that really try to link in with our community. And everything you were just saying just now, just giving me more and more ideas. But it just shows also how crucial it is.
Yeah, to
talk, literally just to talk.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Obviously, we'll go into the You Need to Know campaign more, but about the high percentage of minorities in the area, ethnic minorities, and like we were saying about how people don't attend for real reasons, not just forgetting. Like, we know that somebody who isn't white is a bit more likely statistically to have, like you said, a lower income, be from a background where there is racism in healthcare as well. Let's not ignore that. But for example, somebody that has a lower income job or say is at home with multiple children, they're not going to find it easy to go for a cervical screening appointment at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And surgeries aren't, not that I know of, please, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't have evening appointments or weekend slots to, a cervical screening clinic where, somebody's friend or family member or partner, if they have a partner and aren't a single parent, can look after the kids, or when their awkward shift times, end and they can go for an appointment. I don't think we're giving everybody that needs and has a right to the appointment an equal opportunity to go and book their appointment.
Yeah.
I'm aware of my privileges and I was able to go to my GP very easily. I didn't have, I never, when I say I had an easy time of it, of course I didn't, it was cancer. And I know I was lucky and all of that stuff, but they all factor into the fact that English is my first language, I'm white, I'm educated at degree level. I don't have a physical disability. I don't have a learning disability. I haven't been through any sexual trauma. My family are very comfortable talking about this type of thing. There's a reason I was diagnosed early, and it's not fair that just because somebody isn't all of the things I listed or doesn't have all the things I listed, that they would have a worse outcome. That's inequality.
Yeah.
Like, because of the colour of your skin and what happened to you 5 years ago, or what disability you were born with, that means that you are less likely to be in my position now if we had the same diagnosis.
Which goes back to your point around it's just good to talk. It's good to talk, and it's good to try and find the best ways of really engaging and talking in various different languages with various different forms of communication is the only way we're going to crack this, really. Because you do find, again, going to stats, not giving you too much of the boring stuff in terms of numbers, but you do find that a lot of the do not attend, and we call it DNA in the NHS, do not attend or compliance with pathways is usually the educated, there's a whole load of everything that you just said that you'd find that actually staging is done far earlier as a consequence of that earlier interaction, that understanding of what it is that they're going through, and that actual lack of cultural differences. It absolutely enhances that. But you do find high level DNAs, high level of non-compliance with pathways are usually the ethnic minorities, and for all of the reasons I think you mentioned.
Let's move this on a little bit to the You Need to Know campaign. We've already kind of touched on it a little bit. Karen, do you want to talk us through what the campaign is and how you've been involved?
Very happily. So it's a joint campaign with the North East London Cancer Alliance and the Eve Appeal, the charity that I met you through, Steve, and that it's the UK's leading gynecological cancer research charity. They raise awareness for the 5 gynecological cancers, which are womb, ovarian, cervical, vulval and vaginal, and raise funds for research into the early detection, risk prediction and prevention of gynae cancers. Spiel over. So it's a joint campaign between Eve and NEL, and I've worked for Eve for over 7 years now, since the whole cancer thing. You become a very nice person once you've survived cancer. You run marathons, and they always try and get me to do the walks and the runs, and I say, look, I'll work with you and do the talks, but I'm not changing my personality. I've never been for a run in my life, and just because I survived cancer, I'm certainly not going to start now. So if anyone's listening, we have to get Karen on this twice. No,
you're away though.
Unavailable for walking.
Yeah, I'm unavailable for physical fundraising.
Comedy's fine.
Comedy's fine, but any activity, no. So it's joint campaign between NEL and Eve, and it came from research in 2018 that was done, showing in North East London that people from Black African, Black Caribbean and South Asian backgrounds were more likely to be, first of all, especially with Black women, diagnosed with a womb cancer. So rates of womb cancer are higher in Black women than they are white women. We don't know why. The University of Leicester, that there is research going alongside the campaign with looking into it. Obviously, it's much more complex than that. But for example, white women are more likely to get ovarian cancer, and that in North East London, people from Black and Asian backgrounds are disproportionately more likely to be diagnosed with a late stage womb cancer than an early stage. So they're more likely to get a stage 4 diagnosis and a stage 1. Stage 1 is what I was lucky enough to have, and stage 4, well, there's no stage 5.
Yeah. So
something needs to be done, something needs to be put together to find out why it is worse for people from these backgrounds. So we came together, and it started off with recording people's stories from these communities that have gone through this experience of womb cancer, or just simply want to help raise awareness, and those videos and information leaflets, etc., have been put out in the area on social media campaigns, advertising, local authority websites, etc. And my side of You Need to Know is to go into, when I say a wide variety of community settings, it is a wide variety. I've had, over the last year, a great time doing this campaign, and I've had I've had a laugh. Like you can talk about comedy, I've had a laugh with them. Going to run sessions with different groups of people from these backgrounds, and having a translator when needed, sometimes not, and sharing throughout the hour and a half information about womb cancer. So we talk about gynae health and gynae cancers in general to give people background information, but the focus, because of the rates of people more likely to be diagnosed with later stage womb cancer in the area, because wound cancer is the subject, it's about wound cancer, and most wound cancer is diagnosed in people who are post-menopause, i.e. if you haven't had a period for 12 months or more, you're considered to have gone through the menopause. The average age is about 51 in the UK. So wound cancer is more common in people who are post-menopause, and the most common symptom of wound cancer is post-menopausal bleeding. So the whole session, bit of gynae background info, and then focusing on bleeding after the menopause. Talking all about that, what that means, because if anybody listening to this has any bleeding or knows anybody that has bleeding from their vagina once they've gone through the menopause, it is, unlike lots of people believe, it's not one final period, one last hurrah, a late sign of still being fertile, which in different communities is seen as a very healthy, wonderful thing. It's abnormal bleeding, and it's not likely to be wound cancer in the grand scheme of things, but it is the main symptom of wound cancer, and it has to be reported to a GP, and it is always taken seriously and investigated. But it's getting people to know that it needs to be reported in the first place.
Femi, we touched on this again in episode 1, but how valuable is it for you guys here at the Alliance to get the expertise and the knowledge of a charity like the Eve Appeal, of someone like Karen to help you with these really, really important campaigns?
It's absolutely super valuable. I mean, I don't think we could even put an amount in the value
Priceless.
of that. It's priceless. There you go.
That's
the
what
word I was
say.
looking
Priceless.
for. Priceless. It is absolutely priceless, because it's not only about just bringing the awareness, but it's about allowing people to know that others are also going through it, but also actually you're not alone and you can do something about it. And this is what you need to do from experience. But also engaging with other women who are going through that, I think is crucial, because again, if you've got the wrong people not articulating it quite well, it's people just might not do anything about it.
I think sometimes when you can't relate to people, there's a bit of a disconnect, and I could imagine that if the sessions, I was about to say, if the sessions weren't as good as they are, but
I'm sure the sessions
do you know what the team, and I deliver the sessions, but the team from both groups and the NEL and the Eve Appeal, wonderful people have worked on the campaign. So I just do the sessions. It's a great campaign. The information is valid, vital and correct, and they need to know it. But I can imagine if it were delivered in a different type of setting, in a different way, that there might be a little bit of disconnect. And I just, like we were saying at the beginning, funny stuff can happen, and I don't make a joke. I don't want people to listen to this and think, oh, if I book a session, it will be somebody taking the mick out of this information. It's not the case. But do you know what, like you were saying about getting information in a almost fun way out to different groups of people, something that is universal is laughter. So whether I don't speak your language or not, me bringing out a vulval cushion that is like 5 times the size of a normal vulva and saying, this isn't mine, and holding it up, this huge vulva cushion, that's funny, whatever language you speak.
You have those on your sofa. I imagine
just for special guests. I was about to make a very crude joke, but I won't. I'm on work time. And it's important. Yeah, I think it's important for this information to be delivered in a sensitive but accessible way.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that having the Eve Appeal on board, it just sort of bridges the gap between the information and the people that it's relevant to, I hope.
What sort of level of knowledge are you encountering when you're going in for these sessions? Are you seeing, jaws hit the floor, expressions, of surprise when you're kind of explaining, some of the challenges and some of the issues around these cancers? Or are you finding that people actually have a broad understanding, a basic understanding?
People that we've delivered the sessions to, when we speak about menopause, they might have not maybe known the definition that it's if you haven't had a menstrual bleed for 12 months or more, but a good proportion of the people will have gone through it themselves, be going through it, recognise the symptoms that I go through, and have their own stories about what helped them through it. So that's a sort of universal thing that I've encountered throughout the sessions. But in terms of the symptoms of womb cancer itself, I'd say the average level of knowing the information I was delivering is very low. But that's not because of the communities we're delivering to. I didn't know it before I was diagnosed. I don't think it's society and education in general, not different communities. Anybody can not know the symptoms unless they're told the symptoms of something. So I'd say people generally don't know about the symptoms. Talking about the 5 different gynecological cancers, because if you think it's just, between your legs and your pelvis, it's, on the grand scheme of the body, quite a small area of the anatomy. So I think for lots of people to find out there, within this relatively small part of the body, there are 5 separate diseases, is quite a lot to take in sometimes. And things like vulval and vaginal cancers, they're the 2 least common and they're the 2 least known about. So it can often take a little sort of while for people not to come to terms with, but to sort of register that a vulva and a vagina are different parts of the body and they have different diseases. Lots of people want to know, which we can talk about in more depth in a second, about screening, and I talk about cervical screening because it's the only cancer with a screening programme in the gynae sphere. And I cannot tell you the percentage of people that thought, and understandably, because if you don't know, you don't know, that cervical screening also checked for womb cancer, or that if you had a clear bill of health in terms of your cervical screening result, hi Steve, cervical screening result was negative, great, you would then think, oh, I don't need to worry about womb, ovarian, vulval and vaginal. It's down there, the MOT for everything, and it's not. And that was something we came up against a lot during the sessions.
So as you've explained, there's a screening programme for cervical cancer. Obviously, there's still symptoms that people need to be aware of and need to look out for. In terms of the other 4 gynae cancers, what are the kind of symptoms that people should be aware of?
Well, also with cervix, because if you have any symptoms, it doesn't matter whether or not you've had your screening appointment or not. But so with womb cancer, postmenopausal bleeding, like we've mentioned, is the main sign of womb cancer, and abnormal bleeding in general, because some people we know are younger than menopause age or premenopausal when they're diagnosed. So with womb, cervical and vaginal cancer, abnormal bleeding is the main symptom. So anybody who bleeds from their vagina when they as an individual are not expecting to, would class this as abnormal bleeding. And it's most of the time, again, I really stress in the sessions as well, I want to stress on this, that most of the symptoms, in fact all of the symptoms for all of the gynae cancers are all much more likely to be something less serious than cancer. But it's our job as a cancer charity to talk about when they could be cancer. So any bleeding when you're not expecting to is abnormal bleeding, and abnormal bleeding can be bleeding between periods, bleeding after sex, bleeding after the menopause, any discharge that's anything from pale pink to bloody discharge to dark brown, depending on whether you have a menstrual cycle or not, what contraception you're on, that a bit of brown discharge might be normal for you just before your period. If it's normal for you, fine, but it's when anything changes, that's the thing to look out for. And for cervical cancer and vaginal cancer as well, any sort of pelvic pain during sex, vaginal cancer, any lumps inside the vagina, we're all told to check our breasts. I think that's quite a common, whether people go for their breast screening or not is another question, but I think it's quite a common thing in society to be told to check your chest, check your breast for lumps, what to look out for. The symptoms of breast cancer are quite out there for people to understand and to hear about, but nobody, certainly not for me, I don't know about you, but was told to check your vagina and check your vulva at the same time. Check your boobs, but at the same time, if you don't know, look and touch your vagina inside and your vulva outside, you're not going to know if something changes. So with vulval cancer, any skin changes, look at the vulva, feel it, any red, dark, whiter, depending on your skin tone, raised, lumps, bumps, soreness, a change in a mole, any skin that feels sore, tender, any open sores, any itches inside the vagina for vaginal cancer, outside on the vulva for vulval cancer. And with ovarian, it's completely different. It's not got any sort of bloody vaginary itchy association to it. It's completely different. And ovarian cancer, I know we were talking about the prognosis for black people with womb cancer, but ovarian cancer as a whole has the worst prognosis out of the 5 gynae cancers because it's diagnosed too late, whatever colour you are, whatever background you're from. And that's because the symptoms are really hard to understand. They are things that are often misdiagnosed, like IBS or other gastrointestinal problems. I think of them as sort of tummy and toilet habits. It's anything like persistent bloating that can't be put down to because you're hungover and ate the food you shouldn't have eaten, or because you're stressed and you've got a nervous tummy. Persistent bloating, pelvic, abdominal pain, needing to urinate more frequently, not because you've guzzled loads of water. There's changes to bowel, whether that's constipation or diarrhea, anything that can't be explained and is persistent, tummy, toilet-wise, could be, not likely, could be ovarian cancer. And because it's so often misdiagnosed as things like IBS or just stress or just one of those things, how many times have people heard that? It's just one of those things. We really want people, when going to speak to the doctor, to say, and it's not being dramatic, it's not wasting anyone's time, you're allowed to say, hello, Dr. Steve, I'm worried about persistent bloating, I'm weeing all the time, I feel sore and uncomfortable, I've got constipation, it's been like that for several weeks. I want to rule out ovarian cancer. You're allowed to say that. You're not being dramatic and wasting the doctor's time by assuming you've got ovarian cancer and, wanting all these unnecessary tests. You're allowed to say, I want to rule it out.
Yeah.
Because how will you ever diagnose it or rule it in if it's not looked into?
Femi, it's, as you keep saying, it strikes me, it's so important just to be able to talk about these things openly like we're doing now, not feel like the topics are off the table, whether we're talking to our mates, whether we're talking to a healthcare professional, just having those honest conversations. And people like Karen and charities like the Eve Appeal, campaigns like we're talking about here, they're making talking so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to, actually, it might just be a complaint. It might just be a complaint, or someone continuously complaining about something, your partner continuously complaining about something. You say, actually, let me go at what the chap that you mentioned, or the gent that you mentioned, sorry.
The lad,
whatever.
Yeah. The legend.
What he mentioned, and actually it goes back to everything you're saying is just making me think even more, because how do we get partners, involved, because they might take action where the partner won't. So, and I think that's a very key part that you just touched on that.
I hate gender stereotyping, but I do think typically women, people who identify as female, are naturally a bit more open and able to have more emotional conversations with their peers than men, because there is that whole, association with men not sharing feelings, or it's weak if men do, which is absolutely rubbish, but there is still that sort of narrative in society a bit, especially in various certain communities. And if everybody talks about something, it makes nobody sort of cornered off about that subject, if that makes sense. If we knew that if I know you two are really great and easy talking about vaginal cancer, it would just make it that bit easier for the person that is going through the problem themselves to talk about it. Do you know what? It's just when you're going through something so rubbish, and something that is cancer and is a type of cancer that unfortunately has stigma attached to it, knowing you're supported and can talk to people about it, male or female, will make the whole experience easier. But also, nobody wants to feel embarrassed about what's happened to them. And so if they don't need to feel embarrassed because everybody around them feels comfortable talking about it, it'll be that much easier. But I'm also not going to say, oh, men, don't be embarrassed, talk about everything. Because I get not every guy in the world is going to want me to tell them about my brown discharge. I get that. Eventually, we will get there with each generation changing, but it's not easy.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story, not your journey, your story. And I, for one, have enjoyed hearing about your brown discharge. It's been a really important conversation. And Femi, thank you to you as well.
Thanks very much for having me. Bye.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, brought to you, as always, by the North East London Cancer Alliance. Thank you so much for listening, and also thank you to Femi and to Karen for sharing her story. I really hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch on social media. You can find the Alliance on Twitter or Instagram. Just search for @CancerNEL across those two platforms. And yeah, we would love to hear from you.